The community gymnasium was packed that evening, flags hung high, local veterans honored with small-town pride. A Boy Scout tripped over a folding chair. Parents hushed their children. A local Navy SEAL Lieutenant Commander, Aaron Keller, stepped up to the mic, adjusting his dress blues, the row of medals on his chest gleaming under the yellow lights. He began with practiced charm, thanking the organizers, praising the town's spirit. Then, mid-sentence, he stopped, his eyes locked onto an elderly man in the far back of the room, a man hunched over a folding chair, dressed in a faded brown coat and black cap. He'd come to mop the floors after the ceremony. As he always did, Keller's voice dropped, a single word escaping his lips. Brimstone. The janitor froze. The mop in his hand tilted, resting silently against the waxed floor. His eyes didn't rise. But in that one word spoken softly into the microphone, 40 years of silence shattered. Lieutenant Commander Keller straightened, eyes still on the man. "I'm sorry," he said, addressing the startled crowd, "but I believe the man in the back is a living legend. I was trained on stories that weren't in textbooks, stories whispered by men who swore they'd seen a ghost. His code name was Brimstone." Murmurs erupted across the hall. The elderly man said nothing. He simply turned, quietly walking out the side exit and into the night. But Keller wasn't. Done, he turned back to the mic. "I didn't think I'd ever see him. We were taught that Brimstone wasn't real, that the man who took out entire enemy outposts solo, who rescued downed pilots from deep behind lines, was a myth, a morale tale. But I've seen the files, the redacted pages, the sealed photos, and now I've seen him." The crowd watched, stunned, as Keller stepped down from the podium and walked slowly toward the exit where the janitor had disappeared. Name on paper was Elijah Boone. He lived in a small one-room apartment above a barber shop on Juniper Street, just outside Detroit. Rent always paid early. Refrigerator empty save for coffee and boiled eggs. The windows scrubbed clean every Sunday morning. He'd worked at that community center for 16 years. Always the same routine. In early, out, late. He never asked for raises, never took sick days. A ghost in work boots. Most of the younger staff barely noticed him. To them, he was just the old man who cleaned up after their basketball games and swept confetti after local election nights. But Keller noticed he'd known the codename for years. Brimstone. The man who allegedly crawled through 50 meters of barbed jungle to plant charges. The man who led a silent extraction of 4 POs from Cambodia. In 1984, the man whose existence was denied by every branch of the military. Yet here he was, quietly buffing gymnasium floors. The next morning, Elijah Boone unlocked the gym's side entrance, as usual, but his hands trembled. Not from Agilija, was 73, and stronger than most men half his age, but from memory. He knew the name. Brimstone wasn't meant to echo again. He passed by the lobby, where a small crowd of early birds gathered for a veterans' brunch. Keller was there, speaking with the director. When Elijah saw him, he hesitated just long enough for Keller to catch his eye. "Elijah Boone," Keller said, walking over and lowering his voice. "Or should I say, Sergeant First Class Elijah Boone, Ghost Recon Unit, 1976 to 1994. Elijah's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He turned to walk away. "You saved my father," Keller said suddenly. "In Panama, 1989. Operation Silent Lance. My father was part of the team. You pulled him out. Your name wasn't in the report. But he remembered you, said you carried him through the swamp with a bullet in your leg." Elijah stopped. "My father died last year. His final words to me were, 'If you ever find Brimstone, you salute him.'" So, Keller stiffened, then snapped into a crisp salute. "Thank you." Elijah didn't return the gesture. His hands remained at his sides. "You need to stop," Elijah said finally. His voice was deep, calm, almost to calm. "There are files sealed for a reason. Some things were meant to stay buried." Keller dropped his salute. "So it's true then. Everything. All the stories. They weren't legends. They were consequences," Elijah replied. Then he walked away. That evening, Elijah didn't go home. Instead, he drove out to a small storage facility just off I-75, unit number 117. He hadn't opened it in over a decade. The metal slid up with a groan. Inside, a single olive green duffel, bag of Foot Locker, and an old Army-issued sat phone now long disabled. He opened the locker dock dog tags. A folded American flag. 3 military-grade photographs, none with his name. Just blurry, black-and-white images of a man half hidden in shadows. In one, he was leading hostages through a jungle. In another, he was crouched beside an enemy. Encampment, rifle in hand. Inside was a medal. Not an official one. Not something you'd find in a museum. It was handmade, given by a dying man he'd saved in a village outside Luang Prabang. The note inside simply said, "To the man who doesn't need medals to prove he's real." But now, Elijah knew he had a decision to make. The name Brimstone was out, and once a ghost has been named in public, they can't go back into hiding. He picked up his old duffel bag and walked out of the storage unit without locking it again. Back at his apartment, a man in a dark coat waited on the front steps. "Elijah Boone?" the man asked. "Depends on who's asking," Elijah said. "Agency wants a word." The man replied. "I'm not on their payroll anymore," Elijah answered. The man gave a thin smile. "They think you're about to be—" Elijah's eyes narrowed. Again, then he said nothing. He stepped past the man and unlocked his door. Once inside, he shut the door quietly behind him and double-locked it from under the floorboards. He pulled out an old cassette recorder. He pressed play. A voice crackled out his own recorded decades ago. "This is Agent Brimstone," operation concluded. Time, 2:47. Location, classified. Outcome, hostage secured, witness eliminated. If this is ever heard, then the world forgot me. And someone remembered. Elijah leaned back in his chair. It was time to decide. Would he let the world remember, or bury Brimstone once and for all? Elijah Boone hadn't worn a uniform in nearly 30 years. He hadn't fired a weapon in longer. But that morning, as he stood in front of the mirror, carefully trimming his beard, folding his flannel shirt, into crisp lines, brushing invisible dust from his jeans, the motions felt like ritual. Muscle memory, the kind that never left you. Outside his building, a black sedan idled government plates. Not subtle, he didn't take the front door. Instead, he exited through the basement boiler room, stepping into the alley, his shadow cutting. A sharp figure under the orange Detroit sunrise. He moved like a man who knew exactly where the eyes were watching from, and how to stay just outside their reach. The world had forgotten him, but the machine hadn't. At a diner on 8th and Monroe, he met Lieutenant Commander Aaron Keller. The younger man was already seated, 2 mugs of coffee on the table. Elijah sat without a word. "They're following me," Keller said quietly, eyes on the cream swirling in his cup. "NSA may be Daya. Could be someone deeper." Elijah didn't blink. "You talk too loud." Keller leaned forward. "Why are they scared?" "Sir, why does saying your codename out loud make rooms go silent? Why did the Director of Naval Intelligence personally order me to stand down?" Elijah took a sip of coffee. No sugar, no cream. Keller frowned. "I don't understand. You will?" 3 hours later, they were at an abandoned church near the edge of town. Peeling paint, broken pews, sunlight slicing through cracked stained glass, Elijah led Keller to a hidden stairwell beneath the altar. Concrete steps led down to a room that didn't exist on any blueprint. Inside, for filing cabinets, a map of Southeast Asia pinned to the far wall, a dusty crate labeled AAROP, Ashes and Bone, Heroes Without Graves. Nearest drawer, black and white photos, operation logs, names redacted, faces blurred. But one pattern emerged clearly. All the lead operators, the ones on the front lines, the ones whose missions succeeded against impossible odds, were black. All their official files sanitized. Most didn't even list combat roles, just administrative. Detail or logistic support. "Why?" Keller whispered. "Why erase them?" Elijah walked to the map, placing his palm over Laos. "You ever heard of Operation Sundial?" Keller shook his head. "Exactly." Elijah exhaled slowly, pressing against a loose brick in the wall. A hidden compartment slid open. Inside was a VHS tape and a single dog tag. "You're about to hear a voice you've only read about in rumors." Back in Keller's apartment, the tape played through an old converter hooked to a flat screen. The image was grainy, but the voice was sharp, commanding, confident. It was General Anton Reeves, retired 4-star, celebrated in every military textbook. But here, in this hidden tape from 1992, he wasn't giving a keynote speech. He was speaking to a small group of intelligence officers in a dark room. "Gentlemen," Reeves said, "we have a problem. The black operators we've used for deniable actions are becoming too effective. Media's asking questions. Too many whispers. Too many loose ends. We can't afford a headline like America's greatest operative is a black ghost, so ... We adjust." Someone off-screen asked, "Adjust how?" "We shift commendations. We alter logs." No, this is standard procedure when history isn't convenient. Word was spreading. A leaked blog post from an anonymous source believed to be Keller recounted the Brimstone legend. It claimed the U.S. military had knowingly erased an elite operator's legacy to preserve an image of heroism that fit their preferred mold within hours. Medals never awarded. Reports falsified. A vague statement. No credible evidence supports the claims made by online sources regarding covert operatives. But the dam had cracked and water was coming. 3 nights later, Elijah received a visitor. Not a suit, a woman in her late 60s, dressed simply. A lanyard around her neck identified her as Dr. Helena Wren, Department of Veterans Affairs. "I wasn't followed," she said softly. Elijah nodded toward a chair. "I knew of Brimstone. My brother was in Operation Stillwater," said. "A shadow saved his life and vanished into the trees. I thought it was a hallucination, until now." Elijah looked at her. "Why come here?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Inside, medical reports, mission statements. A photo of 3 black men in camouflage, faces blurred. One wearing a necklace with the same dog tag Elijah had shown Keller. Elijah's voice cracked for the first time in years. "What was his name?" "Staff Sergeant Gabriel Wren," she replied, "but I think his code name was Smoke." Elijah nodded slowly. "He was good. Real good." She placed the folder on the table. "I want the truth told, even if it means war." That night, Elijah sat on his rooftop watching the city lights flicker like distant gunfire. Just the number 003, the 3rd black man inducted into the Shadow Directive, the program that never officially existed. He remembered every face, every mission, every lie. Brimstone was never meant to have a legacy, but the silence was breaking. The ghosts were stirring, and the reckoning had begun. They said he didn't exist, that the missions were classified, the medals never earned, the man a fabrication. But now, those same voices were cracking. Denials crumbling, because Brimstone had stepped out of the dark. The morning of the congressional hearing, the U.S. Capitol was surrounded, not by protesters, not by media, but today they stood for one man who had always stood for them. Inside, Sergeant First Class Elijah Boone, codenamed Brimstone, sat calmly at the witness table. His eyes scanned the room, not for danger, but for hypocrisy. The chairwoman cleared her throat. "Mr. Boone, we've reviewed the evidence submitted, photographs, tapes, classified logs. But for the record, I have to ask, why now? Why come forward after all these years?" Elijah leaned into the mic. His voice was steady, unapologetic. "Because someone said my name." The room stilled. For 30 years, I was content to be forgotten. I buried my uniform. I watched my brothers die with administrative duty on their records. I said nothing. He paused. But when Lieutenant Commander Keller said my codename in public, a low murmur passed through the gallery. People like me as ghosts, tools, black operatives, we could disavow. We were invisible in life and erased in death. A senator scoffed. "With respect, Mr. Boone, many of these operations were classified for national security." Is national security the reason why I led Operation Stillwater and watched a white lieutenant pin on the silver star I earned? Elijah asked. Is it why my friend Smoke Staff Sergeant Wren bled out in a ditch in Angola and was reported as a logistics casualty? The senator shifted in his seat. There's no official record of Operation Stillwater. Exactly, Elijah said. Outside, the public wasn't waiting for official records. In silence now stood at the head of a veteran-led press conference. In his hands was a copy of the original mission tape Keller had leaked, but this time the names weren't redacted. They were spoken aloud. Staff Sergeant Gabriel Wren, Sergeant Lenny Thomas, Specialist Reggie Moore, Sergeant First Class Elijah. Boone. These were the men who ran covert missions, while history forgot their names. Beside him stood a new face, Dr. Helena Wren, Gabriel's sister. Her voice cracked as she said, "They told us my brother was a pencil pusher, that he died of illness in base housing. But I now know the truth, and I will never let it be buried." Again, social media erupted. Hashtag Black Valor, hashtag Honor Brimstone. Hashtag The Erased returned inside the hearing. Elijah Boone was presenting his final statement. "Let me be clear," he said. "This isn't just about me. Written, this isn't a story of conspiracy." A journalist in the gallery tweeted it live. Elijah Boone just turned a congressional hearing into a reckoning. Hashtag Heaton Sparks, hashtag Brimstone testifies moments later. General Reeves, the man on the old tape, was subpoenaed to appear. Under oath and under pressure. He finally admitted, yes, there was a covert protocol to obscure the roles of certain operatives, especially those we considered sensitive to the media image. "What do you mean by sensitive?" the chairwoman pressed. Reeves didn't answer. He didn't have to. 3 weeks later, the President of the United States stood in front of the National Mall, flanked by flags. Stepped up to the podium. He didn't wear a uniform, just his old brown coat, the same one he used to mop floors in. "I don't want this to be about me," he began, "but I will accept this honor for every man who died before this day could come, for every soldier whose name was scrubbed from the story because of the color of their skin." He looked out at the crowd, men who had once been ghosts. To the young men watching, he said, "Never let them write your story without your voice. Your service should never require invisibility." The crowd erupted. Veterans saluted. Families wept. Cameras flashed. Just like that, a man who had never worn a medal now wore the hearts of a grateful nation. Back in Detroit, Elijah returned to the gym. Not as a janitor, as a guest speaker. Kids lined up for autographs. One boy handed him a drawing of a superhero. With a mop in one hand and a rifle in the other, Elijah laughed. "It's missing something," he said. He drew a medal on the superhero's chest. The final scene faded to black dot, and the words appeared on screen. "For every hero they tried to erase, we remember. We speak their names. We write them back into history. This is Hidden Sparks." And this was the true story of Brimstone.